Hi everyone, we're going to pick up on chapter 15 of Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo. And let's see what Winn-Dixie and Opal are up to. Chapter 15. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library air conditioning unit didn't work very good, and there was only one fan, and from the minute me and Winn-Dixie got in the library, he hogged it all. He lay right in front of it, and he wagged his tail, and he let it blow his fur all around. Some of his fur was pretty loose, and it blew right off him like a dandelion puff. I worried about him hogging the fan, and I worried about the fan blowing him bald, but Miss Franny said not to worry about either thing, that Winn-Dixie could hog the fan if he wanted, and she had never in her life seen a dog be made bald by a fan. Sometimes when Miss Franny was telling a story, she would have a fit, and they were small fits, and they didn't last long. But what happened was she'd forget what she was saying. She'd just stop and start to shake like a little leaf. And when that happened, Winn-Dixie would get up from the fan, and he'd sit right at Miss Franny Block's side. And he would sit up tall, protecting her with his ears standing straight up on his head like soldiers. And when Miss Franny stopped shaking and started talking again, Winn-Dixie would lick her hand and lie back down in front of the fan. Whenever Miss Fanny had one of her fits, it reminded me of Winn-Dixie in a thunderstorm. There were a lot of thunderstorms that summer, and I got real good at holding on to Winn-Dixie whenever they came. I held on to him, and I comforted him, and I whispered to him, and I rocked him just the same way he tries to comfort Miss Franny when she has her fits. Only I held on to Winn-Dixie for another reason, too. I held on to him tight so he wouldn't run away. It all made me think about Gloria Dump. I wondered who comforted her when she heard those bottles knocking together, those ghosts chattering about the things she had done wrong. I wanted to comfort Gloria Dump, and I decided that the best way to do that would be if I read her a book, read it to her loud enough to keep the ghosts away. And so I asked Miss Franny, I said, "Miss Franny, I've got a grown-up friend whose eyes are going on her, and I would like to read her a book out loud. Do you have any suggestions?" "Suggestions?" Miss Franny said. "Yes, ma'am, I have suggestions. Of course I have suggestions. How about Gone with the Wind?" "Well, what's it about?" I asked her. "Why," said Miss Franny, "it's a wonderful story about the Civil War." "The Civil War?" I said. "Don't tell me that you have never heard of the Civil War." Miss Franny looked as if she was going to faint. She waved her hands in front of her face. "I know about the Civil War," I told her. "That was a war between the South and the North and over slavery." "Slavery, yes," said Miss Franny. "It was also about the states' rights and money, and it was a terrible war. My great-grandfather fought in that war, and he was just a boy." "Your great-grandfather?" "Yes, ma'am. Litmus W. Block. Now there's a story." Winn-Dixie yawned real big, and he lay down on his side with a thump, and he sighed. And I swear he knew that phrase, "Now there's a story." And he knew it meant we weren't going anywhere real soon. "Go ahead and tell it to me, Miss Franny," I said. And I sat down cross-legged next to Winn-Dixie. I pushed him. I tried to get him to share the fan, but he pretended he was asleep, and he wouldn't move. I was all settled in and ready for a good story when the door banged and pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson came in. Winn-Dixie sat up and stared at her, and he tried out a smile on her, but she didn't smile back, so he lay back down. "I'm ready for another book," Amanda said, slamming her book down on Miss Franny's desk. "Well," said Miss Franny, "maybe you wouldn't mind waiting. I'm telling India Opal a story about my great-grandfather." "You are, of course, more than welcome to listen. It will be just 1 minute." Amanda sighed, a real dramatic sigh, stared past me, and she pretended she wasn't interested, but I could tell she was. "Come sit over here," said Miss Franny. "I'll stand, thank you," said Amanda. "Suit yourself," said Miss Franny, and she shrugged. "Now, where was I? Oh, yes, Litmus W. Block." Chapter 16. Litmus W. Block was just a boy when the firing on Fort Sumter occurred, Miss Franny Block said as she started in on her story. "Fort Sumter?" I said. "It was the firing on Fort Sumter that started the war," said Amanda. "Okay," I said, and I shrugged. Well, Litmus was a 14-year-old boy, and he was strong and big, but he was still just a boy. His daddy, Artley W. Block, had already enlisted, and Litmus told his mother that he could not stand by and let the great South be beat, so he went to fight too. Miss Franny looked around the library, and then she whispered, "Men and boys always want to fight. They're always looking for a reason to go to war. It's the saddest thing. They have this abiding notion that war is fun, and no history lesson will convince them differently." Anyway, Litmus went and enlisted. He lied about his age. "Yes, ma'am, like I said, he was a big boy, and the army took him. And Litmus went off to war just like that. Left behind his mother and 3 sisters. He went off to be a hero, but soon he found out the truth." Miss Franny closed her eyes and shook her head. What truth? I asked her. Why? That war is hell, Miss Franny said with her eyes still closed. Pure hell. Hell is a cuss word, said Amanda. I stole a look at her, and her face was pinched up even more than usual. Before we go on, I just want to stop there, like I usually do when I read this to classes, and explain that the word hell is not a cuss word when it refers to a place. And that is pretty much what Miss Franny is saying, that it's like being in a terrible place. War, said Miss Franny with her eyes still closed, should be a cuss word too. She shook her head and she opened her eyes and she pointed at me and then she pointed at Amanda. You, neither of you, can imagine. No, ma'am, Amanda said, and me said at exactly the same time. We looked real quick at each other and then back at Miss Franny. You cannot imagine. Litmus was hungry all the time, and he was covered with all manner of vermin, fleas and lice, and in the winter he was so cold he thought for sure he would freeze to death. And in the summer, why, there's nothing worse than a war in the summertime. It stinks so. And the only thing that made Litmus forget that he was hungry and itchy and hot or cold was that he was getting shot at, and he got shot at quite a bit. And he was nothing more than a child. Did he get killed? I asked Miss Franny. Good grief, said Amanda, and she rolled her eyes. Now, Opal, Miss Franny said, I would not be standing in this room telling this story. If he was killed, I would not exist. No, ma'am, he had to live, but he was a changed man. Yes, ma'am, a changed man, and he walked back home when that war was over. He walked from Virginia all the way back to Georgia. He didn't have a horse. Nobody had a horse except for the Yankees. He walked, and when he got home, there was no home there. Where was it? I asked her. I didn't care if Amanda thought I was stupid. I wanted to know. Why, Miss Franny shouted so loud that when Dixie and Amanda Wilkinson and me all jumped, the Yankees burned it. Yes, ma'am, they burned it to the ground. What about his sisters? Amanda asked. She moved around the desk and came and sat on the floor, and she looked up at Miss Franny. What happened to them? Dead. Dead of typhoid fever. Oh, no, Amanda said in a real soft voice. And his mama? I whispered. Dead, too. And his father? Amanda asked. What happened to him? He died on the battlefield. Litmus was an orphan? I asked. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Franny Block. Litmus was an orphan. Well, that's a sad story, I told Miss Franny. It sure is, said Amanda, and I was amazed that she was agreeing with me about something. Oh, I'm not done yet, Miss Franny said. When Dixie started to snore and I nudged him with my foot to make him be quiet, I wanted to hear the rest of the story. It was important to me to hear how Litmus survived after losing everything he loved. Well, Litmus came home from the war, said Miss Franny, and she went on with her story, and found himself alone, and he sat down on what used to be the front step of his house, and he cried and cried. He cried just like a baby. He missed his mama, and he missed his daddy, and he missed his sisters, and he missed the boy he used to be. And when he finally finished crying, he had the strangest sensation. He felt like he wanted something sweet. He wanted a piece of candy. He hadn't had a piece of candy in years, and it was right then that he made a decision. Yes, ma'am, Litmus W. Block figured the world was a sorry affair and that it had enough ugly things in it. And what he wanted to do was concentrate on putting something sweet in it. And he got up and he started walking. And he walked all the way to Florida, and the whole time he was walking, he was planning. Planning what? I asked. Why, planning a candy factory. Did he build it? I asked. Of course he did. It's still standing out there on Fairvale Road. That old building, said Amanda, that big spooky one? Oh, it's not spooky, said Miss Franny. It was the birthplace of the family fortune. It was there that my great-grandfather manufactured the Litmus lozenge, a candy that was famous the world over. Well, I've never heard of it, said Amanda. Me neither, I said. Well, said Miss Franny, they aren't made anymore. The world, it seems, has lost its appetite for Litmus lozenges, but I still happen to have a few. She opened the top drawer of her desk. It was full of candy. She opened the drawer below. That was full of candy, too. Miss Franny Block's whole desk was full of candy. Would you care for a Litmus lozenge? She asked Amanda and me. Yes, please, said Amanda. Sure, I said. Can Winn Dixie have one, too? Well, I have never known a dog that cared for hard candy, said Miss Franny, but he's welcome to try one. Miss Franny gave Amanda one Litmus lozenge, and me too. I unwrapped one, and I held it out to Winn Dixie, and he sat up and he sniffed it, and he wagged his tail, and he took the candy from between my fingers real gentle. He tried to chew it on it, and when that didn't work, he just swallowed the whole thing in one big gulp. Then he wagged his tail at me, and he lay back down. I ate my Litmus lozenge slow. It tasted so good. It tasted like root beer and strawberry and something else that I didn't have a name for, something that made me feel kind of sad. I looked over at Amanda, and she was sucking on her candy and thinking real hard. Do you like it? Miss Franny asked me. Yes, ma'am, I told her. What about you, Amanda? Do you like the litmus lozenge? Yes, ma'am. But it makes me think of things I feel sad about. I wondered what in the world Amanda Wilkinson had to feel sad about. She wasn't new in town. She had a mama and a daddy, and I'd seen them with her in church. There's a secret ingredient in there, Miss Franny said. I know it, I told her. I can taste it, but what is it? Sorrow, Miss Franny said. Not everybody can taste it. Children especially seem to have a hard time knowing it's there. I taste it, I said. Me too, said Amanda. Well then, Miss Franny said, you've probably both had your share of sadness. I had to move away from Watley and leave all my friends, I said. That's one of the saddest things I've ever had, and Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry are always picking on me, and that's another sadness. And the biggest one, my biggest sadness, was that my mama left me when I was small, and I can hardly remember her, and I keep hoping I'll get to meet her and tell her some stories. It makes me miss Carson, said Amanda. She sounded like she was going to cry. I have to go. And she got up and she almost ran out of the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. Who's Carson? I asked Franny. She shook her head. Sorrow, she said. It's a sorrow-filled world. But how you put that in a piece of candy? I asked her. How do you get that taste in there? That's the secret, she said. That's why Litmus made a fortune. He manufactured a piece of candy that tasted sweet and sad at the same time. Can I have a piece to take to my friend Gloria Dump? And another one to take to Otis down at Gertrude's Pets, and one for the preacher, and one for Sweetie Pie, too? You may have as many as you want, she said. So I stuffed my pockets full of litmus lozenges, and I thanked Miss Franny for her story, and I checked out Gone with the Wind, which was a very big book, and I told Winn-Dixie to get up, and the two of us went over to Gloria Dump's, and I rode right past those Dewberry boys' house. Dunlap and Stevie were playing football in the front yard, and I was just getting ready to stick out my tongue at them. But then I thought about what Miss Franny said about war being hell, and I thought about what Gloria Dump said about not judging him too harshly. And so I just waved instead, and they stood and stared at me. But when I was almost way past, I saw Dunlap put up his hand in the air and wave back. Hey, he hollered. Hey, Opal. I waved harder, and I thought about Amanda Wilkinson and how it was neat that she liked a good story the same as I did. And I wondered again, who was Carson? And that's where we're going to stop today. We got to chapter 18. We will pick up on chapter 18 tomorrow.